You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
We'll try to spice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Yeah. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and joining me once again, I have Tim Bogatz, dare I now say, my colleague at the Art of Education University. Thank you so much for joining me.
You are welcome. As I always say when I come on, I'm very excited to be here. And yeah, now you're officially part of the AOEU team and couldn't be more thrilled about that. So yeah, that's a fun one. We can now officially say we are colleagues.
Yeah, and I always appreciate your taking the time. I gotta say, I think it was like three years ago, maybe, that you first came on my show, and I'm going to be honest, it was like such a big point of pride for me that when we first talked, you at least pretended you had heard of my show before. And I was like, I cannot believe other people outside my local community have heard this. And so now it is perfect as we're coming up on 5 years of Who Arted, the history podcast whose name is a fart joke. We're talking about Maurizio Cattelan, the artist who made a solid gold toilet.
I was going to say it couldn't work out any better if we're talking about his work and we're talking about, toilet humor. Like, might as well go for the guy who made the golden toilet.
And I got to say, he is one of those artists that I feel like I really did not know or understand, or certainly didn't appreciate when I first came across him. I don't know about you, but I first came across Cattelan with the duct tape banana, the comedian piece.
Same.
I mean, that made headlines everywhere, but that's far from his first major piece. I think he had even retired before he came up with that piece, but I think years ago when I first did my Fun Fact Friday mini episodes, I did a really shallow dive into the comedian piece. And now in doing this episode, it's like there is so much more to him and his work and his story. And it is absurd, but there's something serious about it. And I still don't know where I land on him and his work and the implications of it.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions for you is, how do you feel about his stuff? And yeah, obviously we can get into that later, but I just want to touch on a point that you said. I think a lot of people were introduced to him with the duct tape banana and then kind of learned about him in reverse, I guess, because you find out about that newest piece and then you continue to look back further. And he has all of these, like you said, really interesting pieces from earlier in his career that, I had no idea about. Maybe other people did. Maybe I'm behind the curve, but I was not introduced to him until, much later on. But then when you look back, he has works that are absurd, but somehow poignant at the same time. And, I think he sort of walks that line between, being really relevant and really having something to say and other things that are just ridiculous. And I appreciate anybody who can sort of live in both worlds there, and so I do enjoy his work, like you said, but overall, I still have those questions like, what is he doing with this? Like, do I really like it? And it makes you think, it is thought-provoking, and so I do appreciate that at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking of do you remember the cartoon Daria?
Yes.
There's an episode and there's a moment where Daria, I think, turned to Quinn and said something about how she has a shallowness that is so thorough, it almost resembles depth. And I just keep thinking of that as I'm going about this episode and this research. But I started off planning this as a solo episode, and I was like, I need to talk to someone about this to work out even my own perspective.
We need to work out our thoughts. So yeah, we can do that together here.
So getting into a little bit of the background, Cattelan was born, as most humans were. He was specifically born in Padua, Italy in 1960. He grew up in like a working class family. I think his father was a truck driver. His mother worked as a cleaning lady. Like he wasn't one of those people who was born into the upper crust and the elites. I read somewhere that the greatest predictor of success for an artist is their social network and like being
believable,
born on third base, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But from a young age, I guess he always had this little mischievous streak. He would skip school. He didn't have a formal art education. Instead, he would just wander the streets of Padua, explore the city, and just indulge his curiosity in a way that I feel like kids cannot and certainly should not today. But what I find really interesting is his early jobs. He apprenticed and he was doing labor. He actually will refer to himself as an art worker, not an artist or an artiste.
Yes. Yes.
He is a worker. And I think that's kind of nice because it emphasizes the labor involved, but also like when I think of a worker, I'm thinking of one in a crew in the place manufacturing stuff. And I guess in his early work, he was manufacturing like furniture and stuff like that. But during this time, I want to say like 1980s, give or take, he starts to look around and get a sense for the art world and just sort of like he's intrigued by this strange elitist society, but also like the opportunities it could afford him.
Right.
And so he moves to Milan. And one of the first things I saw that I thought was absolutely amazing and kind of brilliant, but also like, I can't believe this worked. He goes to, in the late 80s, like 1989, he went to Flash Art magazine, which was like one of the lead Italian art criticism magazines, like think Art Forum and stuff like that.
I was just going to say like Art Forum or Art in America, but the Italian version.
Yeah. And so he goes to them, he asks for a palette of their old magazines. And he decides that he's going to make a pyramid, a tower of these Flash Art magazines. And it's constructed like a house of cards, And then he, I guess, even used their graphic designer to make a mock-up of his photograph of his tower of their magazines as a fake cover of Flash magazine, like his very first cover of the magazine.
Nice. That's very meta too. Just like using the magazine to create a cover of the magazine. I like it. I like it.
I like it a lot. And then especially when you start to consider like what specific covers does he have on there? What's visible? And you see like at the top of this house of cards kind of criticism and magazine is Andy Warhol's Marilyn, which is just like so on the nose in terms of like just this embrace of the fake and the plastic and the referential and celebrity obsession at the peak of this thing that is so inherently like unstable. It's one of those things where on the one hand, it's so shamelessly attention seeking. On the other hand, it's so perfectly thought out in every detail. I gotta respect it.
For sure. For sure.
And I think the great thing about it is it's also, the piece was called Strategies. Like he's trying to make a name for himself with a piece he calls Strategy to ingratiate himself with the critics and the tastemakers in the top magazine. And like it worked. I think Cattelan was on the cover of Flash Art magazine legitimately more than any other artist.
Oh,
Like he was
wow.
on the cover like 8 times or something like that.
Okay. That's awesome, man. But it works well, like you said. It's very ironic. It's very meta, as I said, but just yeah, both the name, the idea, all of that put together. It's just a really smart work. And like you said, you have to respect it. It's very well done.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that's the thing about his career. Like, as I looked at the various pieces he's had that really grabbed headlines, that made his career, it was a lot of stuff that was unexpected, that's pushing boundaries. And I like somebody who is willing to go there. I don't always agree with the boundaries that he's pushing. Like, you know, there was a piece that I vaguely remember hearing about, but didn't know that it was a Cattelan piece. Like maybe the name didn't register. So like in 1999, this is how I first like learned of this piece, because I went to Catholic schools growing up.
Okay.
And so in 1999, he makes a piece, an installation, La Nona Hora, the ninth hour. And it depicted Pope John Paul II struck down by a meteorite. And so you can obviously imagine in the schools where I was going, that was not the most popular conception of an art piece.
Right.
And like, you know, to say what you will about iconoclasm and stuff like that, I think, you know, the central message behind it, what he was trying to do was talk about how, as Cattelan said, power, whatever power, has an expiration date, like milk. And I think that is a really interesting statement, and it's a powerful statement when you stop to think about it. And, you know, I think of it not so much as now as a more mature adult looking at it. I think it's not so much about the specific institution that or the religion or the faith that he's taking a shot at, so much as just institutions more broadly. And
Right.
how do you make that point? It has to be the most recognizable figurehead in that institution. And so I think that's kind of an interesting statement. I mean, obviously it caused a controversy.
Yeah, and I think he's just very good at figuring out how to get the most eyes on his work, or how to really sort of, you know, strike up some passion or some feelings, good or bad. And that's sort of how he gets his bigger message across. And so he does have a message with a lot of his work, but he's just, you know, really, really good at getting people all up in their feelings, and making them emotional, and for better or for worse, and getting them to kind of look at his work and hopefully, you know, think about that bigger message. And so that's something that I think, you know, again, like you said, you may or may not agree with it, but he does a great job of getting attention to his work.
Yeah. And I mean, it feels a little trollish to me, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like, there's a little bit of a wink, I think, to it that is very disarming. Like, I can't get as angry as sometimes I would like to be, and that somehow frustrates me more, because it's so well done, and there's so much thought behind all of this, that, you know, like I say, it's hard to get too upset about it.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, that he's just, part of him is just a showman, I think. And you know, it is a little bit trolly, you know, but if he weren't trolling you, would you have ever seen the work? Would you know about the work? Would you know about the artist? And so I think there's a method to his madness with that.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And you know, as we've already alluded to, probably one of the most famous works, certainly the most recent hugely famous work, was The Comedian. That was the piece in 2019 that consisted of a banana duct taped to a wall.
Right.
And it's so funny, I think, because in Art Basel, Miami, it's like one of the biggest art fairs with the wealthiest of the wealthy, the elitist of the elite, and people are going to see a banana duct taped to a wall, and multiple people paid about $120,000 for a certificate of authenticity and instructions in case they don't know how to duct tape a banana to the wall. The absurdity of that piece, and the fact that then what was it? David DeTuna came in and just ate it off the wall in a performance he called Hungry Artist. And I think there's been a similar incident maybe like 2 years ago in a museum, like a college kid ate it off the wall or something like that. It just every time I look at it and think about it, it just gets more and more ridiculous.
And it really is. And I think it's another one of those similar to the one with the Pope, like you said, it's just designed to get eyeballs on it because it is so easily copied, like so easily made fun of or turned into a meme or, just going viral for whatever reason. And then when you attach the fact that people are paying 6 figures for a banana duct tape to the wall, like that's a story that everybody is going to pick up and everybody is going to see. And I think he's just a master at getting his name out there, getting the eyeballs on his work. I want to ask you a question about that one. I don't know if you know the answer to this too. Was like there an impetus for this work? Was this something that he had been thinking about for a while going into Art Basel, or was this sort of a spur of the moment? It'd be funny if we duct tape a banana to a wall and see what happens from that. Do you know his reasoning behind that, or what his inspiration was?
So I don't think I know concretely. Everything I've read, I feel like I mostly see like criticism about it. I mostly see writing that is about the thought-provoking nature of this piece and how it calls into question what are we valuing with conceptual art and stuff like that. Right. And the title Comedian obviously alludes to the fact that it's meant to be kind of playful.
Yes.
We're having a laugh about this. And, I like it because while it is, I feel like it's not even trollish. It's more impish. It's that mischievous with a smile, and everyone's in on the joke and everyone's enjoying the joke and everyone's recognizing there is a fundamental absurdity to people paying for produce that will rot on the wall or even better still, they're not even paying for the produce. They're paying for the right to hang their own produce that they have to cycle out as it rots as necessary and stuff like that. Yeah. To pay for the idea of taping a banana to a wall is inherently silly, but then it's also a very serious piece that sparks a conversation about what do we value in art. Right. He's stated it's just a banana, end quote. And I think the fact that he kind of refuses to give a more thorough, high-minded explanation of it. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of perfect. Yeah. Because I would find it insufferable if he wrote that kind of art speak, like high-minded, like
the rotting of the banana represents the fleeting of life and that sort of,
and by using the ready-made objects, he is democratizing the artistic production and recontextualizing the decontextualized piece. I think just saying it's a banana, not everything has to, like, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. I think the directness And the directness is kind of a through line in all of his work when you think about it.
Yeah.
You know, he was literally depicting the figurehead of the church toppling. He was literally putting the magazine covers together into a pyramid for a piece he was calling Strategies, all about how he wanted to have the cover of that magazine. In all of his pieces, he is super direct. And in some ways, I find that really refreshing.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, there's not a lot of art speak. There's not a lot of, high-mindedness. I think there's a lot of thought. I think his work is very smart. It's very intelligent, but he doesn't make it inaccessible. I mean, like it or not, like it's something that people can understand, people can react to. And I think the frankness and the directness is a huge part of that. And yeah, I like you commend him for that. I think it's a really cool thing.
Yeah. And on the topic of things that are frank and direct, I think after the break, we got to get into America, or as many people would know it, the golden toilet piece. So now, as we're looking at his piece, America, and I got to look up the year on this. I can never remember exactly. It was like 20...
I think it was 2016, if I remember
2016,
correctly.
yeah. 2016, America. He makes a solid gold toilet, and a functional one.
I was just gonna say, you gotta say that it is a workable, functional toilet.
Yeah. There's so much about this, but what do you think of this piece? What comes to your mind as you're looking at it?
Man, I was just gonna ask you what you thought of the piece. I think it's very interesting. Just the title of America, and what do we represent with America? What do we represent with a toilet that's completely made of gold? And I think there's a lot that has to do with capitalism and wealth, and also sort of the inequality that goes along with all of that, and just a bigger critique of capitalism, I guess. But I also love the fact, right before the break, we were talking about how he makes things accessible. Like, this was literally in the bathroom at the Guggenheim, and anyone could use it. And so I really appreciate that, I guess, just the fact that not only did he want to create this, but he took it to the next level and made it functional. It's not something that is just up on a pedestal. And obviously, you think back to Duchamp and his ready-mades and the famous urinal. But here he takes that to the next level by installing it in the bathroom, creating it out of gold, making it functional. And I think that it's got a lot of layers to it. I think it's pretty interesting overall. So I would say I'm a fan. So what about you? What are your thoughts?
I could still take both sides of this argument if I'm being 100% honest, because I love that you also went to the Duchamp reference, because I was also thinking, like, this feels in some ways referencing Fountain from 1917, but it feels like it's taking it into a new territory. I think there's something delightful about Duchamp took that ready-made and made it non-functional, and he, Cattelan, had people fabricate this functional item out of a precious metal that seems like it shouldn't be functional.
Right.
And I think there's also something really interesting about this juxtaposition between something that people desire so much with gold. Throughout history, people have desired gold, and then a bathroom fixture that, like, it's so associated with, like, shame and secrecy and like you're locked away and please leave me alone and we don't need to talk about this. Like there's something I find like this push-pull happening there, you know? There's something that is bright and shiny and appealing, but also revolting simultaneously. And now I'm thinking of like Merritt Oppenheim's Luncheon in Fur Object, you know?
Yeah, the fur coat. Yep.
Like I find it really interesting when people play with those ideas. And, you know, the thing of it being a commentary on America, you know, I think we all know America is a land of contradictions with a lot to be admired and a lot that is problematic and that we don't like to think about and we don't like to focus on. And I find that to be an interesting way of sort of framing that commentary. But also when you think about America as this place of contradictions and there's stuff that we don't like to think about and there's those uglier bits, it still works. You know, say what you will. It's functional. And I think there's something about that too. That like, cause I think in the American ethos is that work ethic and that, you know, utilitarian streak, an appreciation for work and utilitarian stuff. And I think this piece in the Guggenheim, it sparks a conversation. And the fact that visitors were allowed to actually use it.
Right. I really wish I could have gotten in there on that. You know, like how many people can say that they've used a golden toilet before? And so I think that is something, like you said, it's accessible, it's fun, it's interesting, and highlights those contrasts. But I'm sorry, I'm sure I took you away from your train of thought there. I just wanted to say how excited I was about the toilet.
Well, don't get too excited because however many people could say they did it, no more people will be able to say they did it because in 2019, it was stolen. The 18-karat solid gold toilet was stolen from the Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, England. I guess that was like the birthplace of Winston Churchill. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and I guess they had the golden throne there for a temporary installation, but overnight it was like ripped out. They like, I think did damage to pipes and stuff as they ripped it out. And it has been lost. I think it's assumed to have been melted down.
Yeah. That's unfortunate.
But, you know, I guess it's the way things go. From what I understand, there is no talk of like remaking it. It had an estimated value of like $6 million, which
oh my goodness,
it seems like it's going to be hard to raise that much more. Like, I mean, melted down, the material cost of it was like $5 million alone. Wow. So.
Yeah, and I don't know. He seems like the type of artist who doesn't want to repeat himself. You know, he's said what he has to say, and I don't think he wants to revisit that or go back to those things again.
And I think that's a fair stance. I mean, I think it's funny because in my rating scale, as you know, I always say, is this one for the Louvre? Is this one for the Lab? Or is this one for the Lou? And I think this is the quintessential piece for the Lou, in every sense of that term, but also because, you know, the fact that he's not remaking it is a pretty strong indication that like the statement has been made, the piece served its function. We don't need to preserve that for the ages. You know, something else will come along to stir people's thoughts and stir people's imaginations and spark a debate and spark conversation. But repeating the same play is not going to have the same effect. Yeah,
exactly.
And kudos to him for realizing that.
And
so I guess the one thing I I feel like I didn't capture so far, but I really do want to get your thoughts on is if we talk about this as a functional piece, and we've talked about Cattelan is courting so much controversy and sparking debate and bringing ideas to the fore. The thing I find kind of unsatisfying is it doesn't take that next step of like, so what do we do about it? You know?
Yeah.
Like, is that enough?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very good point of is that enough? Because yeah, there's always that overarching question, like the answer or the artist poses that question, and then what? Like, do they have a responsibility to answer that question for us? And I think, that's one of the reasons that a lot of people get, maybe turned off by contemporary art, where these questions get raised, but the artists don't feel like they have any responsibility to answer them for us. And I don't know. I have a tough time answering that myself, I guess, because I feel like, good art should make you think, it should make you question, it should make you feel something, it should make you curious. And Cattelan's art does all of that for me. And so I don't know if he owes us anything beyond that. But yeah, the point could be made that it's maybe not the best look to, just raise all these questions and then run away, raise all these questions and refuse to answer. So I don't know if I have a more satisfying answer than that, then I'm not sure. But I feel like he does a good job of raising questions and making me curious. So personally, I'm okay with what he does. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think your sort of ambivalence there kind of validates my ambivalence. Okay. So I appreciate that. Like for me, the thing is, I feel like in some ways it's really easy to kick at things and poke holes in things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For me, the hard thing is to find or propose a solution instead of just identifying the problem. And so to me, it feels like in some ways a little bit of a cop-out. And then at the same time, I'm thinking back to just like this afternoon. So like my son is studying government, and we're at the library, and he's like, I want to get a book about government. And I'm sure you are well aware, so many of those books are written by pundits and politicians that have a very clear viewpoint, and it's very self-serving. And it was like, I think there is a space for something that is bringing an issue up and not telling you what to think about it.
Yes.
Right? So like, I don't necessarily feel like an artist needs to be posing the solutions all of the time. But ultimately where I land with Cattelan, like, and maybe this is because in my childhood, like I said, growing up, Catholic schools, all of that, and the iconoclastic piece with the Pope, there's a clear viewpoint in there. When you talk about power systems have a shelf life and all of that sort of stuff, I feel like if you're posing a question in a way that sort of is inherently colored or shaded or has a viewpoint, then I think you need to go that next step. And you know what I'm saying? Like when you say, like, when you put a toilet called America, I mean, how is the average American going to interpret that?
Right.
There's obviously a viewpoint in there. And so I feel like you owe it to the audience to have the courage and not just like be a bomb thrower. You know what I mean?
I agree with you on one point there, but on the other side of things, I would say when you are taking on existing power structures or things that are way bigger than yourself, with Cattelan, that would be the Catholic Church, that would be the United States of America. Like those are huge things. And I think we can probably guess his viewpoint just from the artwork. So I don't know that he needs to go beyond that. I feel like his points are pretty clear on that. Then if we're just taping a banana to the wall, like I would love some answers to that. Like, is it a prank? Is it commentary on the contemporary art world? Things like that. And that's just for my personal curiosity, I guess. I don't know that he owes me any answers, but just, for my own knowledge, I would love to know what he's thinking with that. But it's tough because he's had such a long career and such a varied career that I think different works can take different approaches, but that's a whole different conversation that we maybe don't have time to get into at this point.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's funny how much we agree, and yet on those specific things, we almost have the opposite viewpoint. I'm more willing to let the banana have a pass, whereas I feel like when there is a clear viewpoint and you're clearly critical of something, that's where I feel like it's unsatisfying to just take a shot at the emperor and not have,
and then walk away.
I feel like there should be more to it than that.
Understood.
But regardless, even when we disagree, I really appreciate your taking the time to share your thoughts and your insights, because I could not have strung together enough coherent thoughts on this one.
Well, I appreciate the invite as always. I love these discussions, and I just, being the art history nerd that I am, I love bouncing ideas back and forth with you. Like you said, even if we disagree, it's good to have the conversation. So thank you for inviting me on again.
Thank you so much.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.